Welcome back to class, everybody. Today we are going to finish our discussion on the hip. I may as well get started. What I would like to do is screen share today's lecture and just get right to it. So, by the way, Jose and Zach, I appreciate your participation in the course more than you could imagine. You know, you guys haven't missed a day, and I know that this is an online thing, and I have been posting everything on YouTube, so you technically don't have to necessarily be here live, but your participation and your support of me and the class is duly noted. And as a human being, I really appreciate you guys.
Yeah, no problem, man.
You know, I appreciate you guys very much that, you know, I wake up in the morning and imagine if I was to do this and nobody logged on. You know what I mean? How would I feel then? You know, I would still do it and I would still post it. But that you're here, Jose, and that you're paying attention and that you're trying to be part of this class is a blessing to my life for sure.
Yeah, no problem, man.
No, so I appreciate that for sure.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so everybody in the class has been sent their exam number 1. They can feel free to answer the questions over again. Now, intentionally, I didn't comment on the exam itself with much information. I didn't say what was wrong with your answer, because if I did that, then I would be giving you the answer, and then you just reiterating my words wouldn't make any sense. But you can see how many points I gave. It's anywhere from 1 to 4 points. Usually one point means that you answered the question. Like you literally just wrote a word. You didn't answer the question effectively whatsoever, but I had to give you more than 0 points because you actually answered something. 2 points is that like you were somewhat on topic. It was reasonably like, you were talking about kinesiology, that's for sure. And it was worth more than a 1 point question, 1 point value, but it wasn't anywhere close to the answer. A 3 point question means that you were pretty close to the question. It was just, there was a couple of maybe issues with the way that you answered it. And I tried to like highlight or parentheses or underline or circle the parts of the answer that I didn't think were effective. And then 4 points is full credit for the question. So take a look at those hints. Again, Jose, Zach, if you need me for any reason, give me a call. Call me on my personal number. I'll help you. All right, I'll go through each question with you if you need.
I also got Zach's number now, so I can show him a text just in case.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to Zach. You know, ask your peers and see if Zach can give you some guidance, you know, and now instead of just me, you have 2 people that can hook you up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So work on those. I don't care when you give that back to me. We have until the end of the semester. So you have another month to work on those answers. And then we also have our next exam starting next week. So I'll go through the review on Monday, but the next exam is going to be on the shoulder and the hip. And that's a good segue to get into today's discussion. So what I'd like to do is review our discussion of the hip that we had yesterday or on Monday. We'll talk quickly about the bones, joints, and ligaments, but I want to talk about gluteus medius, angle of inclination, and the emergence of a Trendelenburg gait. The Trendelenburg gait is not an active decision that the brain makes. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I'd like to have a Trendelenburg gait or a pelvic drop. That is an emergent property of a system that has changing variables. All right, that's not a cognitive decision. Nobody makes a decision to go from a normal gait to a Trendelenburg gait. So that's an example of like a high order emergent property of some type of changing system. Today, what I want to do is talk about joint reaction force and how to use a cane effectively. All right, so at the end of the day, I'd like you to be able to identify the various bones and joints of the hip, but I think that's more anatomy and physiology, and I hope that you've had that course before? Jose, have you had anatomy and physiology?
Yes, I had anatomy.
So, I mean, you should be aware of most of the structures and this and that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that you have a doctorate in that. I don't know all of the structures and muscles and bone.
Yeah.
And
I have an idea, yeah.
so that's all we need.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to do is maybe this next item here, compare and contrast the bones and articulations of the hip. I think that's going into a discussion of mobility versus stability, or structure and function. And remember, the function of the shoulder is to have a wide range of motion so that you can manipulate tools in the environment. But the hip is supposed to be a stable joint so that it can dissipate the forces of your body weight and the ground reaction force as you're locomoting. And it's supposed to be a stable joint so that you can walk and move around effectively. Because of that change in function, the structure of the hip has got to be totally different than the shoulder. And indeed it is. And if the structure is different, then the mechanism for injury is going to be different. Today, what we're going to talk about Newton's laws and how they relate to joint reaction force. Remember, Newton's third law is every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if the force of body weight is really high because somebody is obese, that force of body weight, and I'll draw this, is going to push down on your femur, your femoral head, your femoral neck. And in order for that femoral neck not to crush under that weight, the femoral neck has to be pushing up on the force of body weight. So as the force of body weight gets higher and higher and higher, the femoral neck, the femoral head, the femur is going to have to push up harder and harder and harder. Eventually, it might not be able to deal with the force of body weight. So how do you reduce the force of body weight and thereby reducing the force on the femoral neck, femoral head, and the femur bone itself? Well, you can use a cane, and I'll show you how to do that.
I'm guessing the same thing happens when you're squatting, right? Because obviously you got a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Absolutely correct. But
the weight is pushing down, and obviously you have to push up for you to be able to bring that up.
But I would assume that if you're squatting, you have the musculature to deal with that.
Yeah.
You have the bone density and you have the bone matrix to deal with that.
Yeah, like you can't just go and squat 315 for the first rep.
Or you can't squat 315 if you're 75 years old and you have poor bone structure.
That is also true.
Okay. Jose, you can stay on mic the whole time, okay?
I usually, sometimes I do, I just forget to put on mute.
I know, I'm Howard Stern, you're my Robin, so you can stay on mic as much as you want. We'll just vibe back and forth. All right, so let me go to my annotation stuff. All right, so bones of the hip, ilium, ischium, pubis, blah, blah, blah. Femur, acetabulum, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I really want to try to hammer down something here with the gluteus medius. So I'm going to switch off of my my screen and go to this screen here and try to draw and try to just show you a little bit of a difference in terms of mechanism for injury at the hip associated with the gluteus medius. Hopefully,
I really need to get a good understanding of this because I feel like I have a hip injury. Like seriously, that I haven't taken care of yet.
Well, hopefully I do a good job at this. So give me a second. Let me just move this over. So let me try to draw the best I can with what I have here. Let's say I have a femoral neck that looks like this. Hold on. Let's see if I can make this happen. Draw the line. Resume share. Resume share. Am I sharing right now with you?
I can see the screen, yeah.
Okay, all right. So let me go back to my Word doc. All right, and let me draw this right here. I hope this goes well because this will be helpful to you guys. Why can't I draw?
Professor, will you know, like, obviously you're not a doctor, so I'm not expecting you to know, but like, do you know what could be if, like, let's say like I'm warm, like I went hitting, like I went to the gym, I play basketball, whatever, like in the moment I'm good, but then when I cool down, my hip, my left side, hurts like so bad that I can't even sometimes pick my leg up. Like I have to limp while I walk.
I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about it. I don't have an X-ray in my head, so I can't really
Yeah.
exactly. But let's see what we can do. Let me try to screen share one more time. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I give you some ideas. All right.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Because I know obviously you wouldn't know exactly what it is, but since we're talking about hips and hip flexors and everything.
So let's just draw a picture here, okay? I'm going to draw a picture of your femur. This is your femoral head and your femoral neck. This is your acetabulum here. This is not exactly what it looks like, but it'll be good for now, all right? And you have a muscle that goes from here and attaches to here, all right? Pretty much. Now, this muscle here is called your gluteus medius. Now, that muscle is going to fire. Let's go like this. And when it does so, it's going to fire in this direction here. Okay, it's going to fire in that direction. But last class, we talked about an angle of inclination at the femoral neck, this angle here. We talked about this angle here. And we talked about how in coxa vara, that angle is going to be a little bit like this. And coxa valga, that angle is going to be a little bit steeper, a little bit closer to vertical. So it's going to look more like this. And now what I want to use is vector addition to explain potential changes at the hip because of this coxa vara and coxa valga angle in regards to the way that this gluteus medius is firing. So let me try to undo all of this and make a little bit of a more clear drawing here. Let's say I have a coxa vara, and I'm going to say it's a 90. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say it's a coxa vara angle of inclination like this. Now, just so I can make it a little bit clear, let me just draw on top of that what I just drew before. So this is your femoral neck and your femoral head. And that's fitting inside the acetabulum of your hip. This is your hip here. All right, and then you would have the other side of the hip here. And you would have, oh boy, let's just erase that part and then I'll be good. So you can see that this angle here is somewhat close to 90 degrees. And if I was to draw the muscle itself, it would have to look something like this, okay? It attaches to the greater trochanter here of the femur. And this isn't a perfect drawing. I'm on Zoom, so it's hard for me to draw. But let's say we have the muscle here. And remember, a muscle can be drawn as a vector, and a vector is an arrow. So I'm going to erase all of this stuff except for the pull of the muscle. And you can see the pull of the muscle is going to be in this direction here. So let me erase everything. And I'm going to just draw the direction of the pull of the muscle. The muscle is going to pull in this direction. Now let's do a little bit of vector addition, because this is the whole reason we did vector addition in the first place. Now, this arrow or this gluteus medius pulling in this direction is a combination of the gluteus medius pulling in this direction here plus this direction here. Now, if I do vector addition, just to show you, and I start at this arrow here, and I draw a line that's equal and opposite to the other arrow, it'll look like something like this. Not perfect, but I'm trying the best I can with zoom annotation. And then if I start at the apex of this arrow and draw an equal and opposite arrow to this one, it would look something like this. And the resultant addition of this amount of pole of the, of the gluteus medius in the horizontal direction, combined with the gluteus medius, I'm going to change this, in the horizontal. Obviously, Zach, this should say right here in the vertical direction. So I'll just go like this, in the vertical direction. In order for the gluteus medius to pull in this direction, it's a combination of a little bit of vertical pull plus a little bit of horizontal pull. Now, Jose, if the gluteus medius is firing and the hip is in a coxa vara angle here, is the gluteus medius firing more in the horizontal direction or more in the vertical direction?
More towards the horizontal direction.
Absolutely. So when the muscle fires, what it's going to do is, and let me erase this here. When the muscle fires, what it's going to do, if it's two coxa vara, which is, and I'll just go, this is coxa vara. All right, where the angle of inclination of this femoral neck is pretty shallow. This angle here is pretty shallow. All right. Now, as Jose said, it's firing more in the horizontal direction than the vertical direction. That means if I have the joint here and the acetabulum here, and the muscle is like this, it's going to tend to take this part of the femur and move it more horizontally than vertically. So typically, I'm screen sharing. I'm screen sharing, but I want it to be big. How do I do this? Why did that happen? 1 second. Okay. So typically what's going to happen is if the muscle is firing too much in this direction, it's going to pull this entire bone too far into the joint. And if that's the case, it could make it so that this part of the joint right here, this part of the joint right here, makes contact with this part of the acetabulum right here. And like we said with Wolff's Law, any bone that's under increased force and pressure is going to start to grow more in size and density to deal with that increased force and pressure. So it could be the case that right here, oopsies, undo that and erase right here. It could be the case that parts of the bone on the medial portion start to overgrow and parts of this bone start to overgrow. And now all of a sudden we have a reduced joint space here, and we might have not such a smooth articulation and potentially the beginning of osteoarthritis. So if you have a coxa vara angle of inclination, the gluteus medius is going to work more in the horizontal direction than it normally should, and it's going to take this whole bone and pull it in this direction, which is going to make a contact point here. in here in the joint, which is going to increase pressure and force, which is going to cause potentially this bone to overgrow, all right, and make too much friction in the bone there and lead to the breakdown of the bone on the lateral surface of the femoral head, where this bone here, the femoral head, makes contact with the acetabulum. Okay? That's not a good thing. So this is potentially an issue with coxavera. All right, now let me clear all of this stuff and show you potentially what would happen with a coxavalga angle of inclination. Remember, coxavalga, here's my greater trochanter, here's my femoral head right here, and my femoral neck, and the rest of my femur. And then I have the acetabulum here. And now I would have my gluteus medius firing in this direction. And now the gluteus medius is going to fire in the, the gluteus medius is going to fire in this direction here. Because this angle of inclination here is higher in coxavalga, it's going to force the gluteus medius to fire in a different direction. In coxavera, as Jose said, the gluteus medius is going to fire more horizontal than vertical. But in coxavalga, the gluteus medius is going to fire more vertical than horizontal. Jose, are you following what I'm talking about right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to erase all this, and I'm just going to use this arrow to represent the pole of the gluteus medius. So I can go like this, clear my drawings, and I can say, okay, now this here is the arrow that represents the pole of the gluteus medius in coxavalga. Now just coxavalga, V-A-L-G-A, coxavalga. And that's when the femoral head and neck kind of looks something like this, where it's really steep. Now you'll notice here, if the gluteus medius, this is the firing of the force due to the gluteus medius. And now if my hip or my femoral head, my femoral neck here is at a pretty high angle, it forces the pole of the gluteus medius to be more vertical now. Than horizontal. So here is the force of the gluteus medius in the vertical direction, and you compare that with the force of the gluteus medius, in the horizontal direction. Jose, my dude, my shortstop, is the gluteus medius firing more in the vertical or in the horizontal direction now?
Vertical.
Absolutely. So now if I have somebody who has a coxavalga angle of inclination, they're going to have their femur, their greater trochanter, their femoral neck, their femoral head here. And that's going to fit in their acetabulum. And typically what should happen is there should be almost the same amount of pull in this direction as there is in this direction. And if that's the case, then the force of body weight is going to be distributed along this whole surface here. But with somebody who has a coxavera angle of inclination, coxavalga, the force is more in this direction than this direction. So that means what's going to happen is the force of body weight, or the firing of the gluteus medius, is going to force there to be a contact point on the superior surface of the femoral head and on this surface of the acetabulum, and not evenly distribute the force along the entire femoral head. Remember, we talked that pressure is equal to force, which in this case is the force of body weight. So somebody who's obese is going to have even more of an issue with this. The force of body weight divided by surface area. And because somebody has a femoral angle of inclination here that's pretty steep, the pole of the gluteus medius is going to force this whole bone to move upward more so than it normally would and make a contact point here, which is going to increase the pressure at that point, which again could result in Wolff's Law and more bone growth here and potentially more bone growth here. And then all of a sudden, that joint space is severely reduced and the amount of friction at that particular spot in the joint is going to increase and potentially lead to osteo problems, bone problems there. So that's an example of how the change of angle of inclination can not only lead to increased bending potential at the femoral neck because of increased torque that we talked about last time, but it's also going to change the angle at which some of the muscles are fired. And if those muscles aren't firing in somewhat equal directions, it's going to force contact points on particular parts of the anatomy, which could be detrimental. All right.
Can I
So
ask a quick question, Professor?
clear, Zach?
So, is there like an example how these injuries would present themselves? Like, would the person just like maybe complain of a tight hip, or would it affect their walking abilities, or?
I mean, I think all of it. Now
Okay.
that we're talking about a hypothetical there, so let me go back and let me try to clear all my drawings and go back to today's lecture, and maybe I have it even have an X-ray of what it might look like in a second. So let's go to the next couple of. All right, so now you can see here, Zach. Now this probably isn't exactly correct, but you can see right here, and I'm not a radiologist, but you can see that there's a smoother aspect of the superior femoral head than there is right here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Now, it's not really surprising to me that the lateral aspect of the femoral head here is breaking down because this individual is coxivara. You see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So I'm not a radiologist. I'm not 100% sure about this, but you can see that breakdown right there, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's going to lead to some lateral compressive forces directed into the acetabulum and could lead to deterioration of that particular aspect of that femoral head there. Now, how would that present? I'm sure people would have pain, but they would say like something like, it's inside my hip. I don't know where. I'm not sure where. You know what I mean? They wouldn't be able to palpate it because it's inside their hip. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I would say that's probably the way that I would answer that. All right. Now, you also have the next slide is. So now you can see here that this is a coxivara angle of inclination. And because of the bending force of the force of body weight, you can see here that there's a break in the femoral neck here. Right? You can see that.
Yeah.
This is clearly coxivara here.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right? So, I mean, again, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor that can diagnose people and stuff. So for me to tell you, yes, this is happening, yes, that is happening, I feel it's like maybe I'm overstepping my bounds here. But what I can say is that because of the torque and the forces put on these systems, with the limited information I have, I'm not surprised that there's a fracture in the femoral neck here. I'm also not surprised that there is deterioration of the lateral aspect of that femoral head, given this Coxa-Vara angle of inclination there. Okay?
And so am I seeing that it's the fracture is happening at the femoral neck?
For this situation, I think that if this looks like a fracture to me, it seems as though it does, right?
Yeah.
It seems as though this fracture here would be because of that bending torque.
Yeah.
Increased bending force, because the axis of rotation here is further away from the contact point, and therefore there's a big torque on the femoral neck here, which is eventually going to break down that particular bony structure, which is the femoral neck.
All right, thank you.
Situation here, this breakdown of the lateral portion of the femoral head here, to me, could be, not saying it is, but could be because of the increased compressive forces into the joint because of the changed firing direction of the gluteus medius. Reasonable?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So now you have a Coxa-Valga angle of inclination, and because the gluteus medius is going to fire more in this direction, whoopsies, because the Coxa-Valga, the gluteus medius is going to fire more in this direction here, there's going to be more vertical than there is horizontal. And because of that, I wouldn't be surprised if there was breakdown in this superior surface of the femoral head here. Okay? As opposed to the smooth articulation of the lateral surface of the femoral head. Okay? Again, I'm not a radiologist, so I can't necessarily tell you whether or not these x-rays are telling you 100% what I'm talking about. And I don't want to pretend like I do know those things. So, all right. I would like to move on, or else we're going to be here forever today. So now let's say, for instance, you have to fix these problems and you would want to use a cane. Let's say you have a Coxa-Vara angle of inclination or a weakened gluteus medius. What would you do? Well, let's take a look at Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when I push down on a cane with my hand, that pushes the cane into the ground, and then the ground is going to push back up on the cane. A similar thing happens here at the gluteus medius. At the femoral head. If the force of body weight, which is acting through the pelvis here, is pushing down on my femoral head, in order for the femoral head not to crush under this particular force due to body weight, the femoral head is also pushing up in this direction. Now, if the femoral head was pushing up, but it wasn't strong enough to counteract the force of body weight, then this structure would collapse. Now, the force of body weight is pushing down in this direction. We can call that force, the force due to body weight. The upward force, we're going to call the force, and we're going to label it the joint reaction force. So the higher the force of body weight, the more the joint reaction force has to be. So again, we talked about a mechanism for injury at the hip. I would argue that a mechanism for injury at the hip is probably obesity. So if you want to reduce injury at the hip associated with the bending of the femoral neck or associated with joint reaction force, the number one solution is probably to manage the force of body weight. And if that's the case, make sure you take a look and see what sugar does in terms of obesity and stuff. But I don't want to get into that. So let's say we want to use a cane, all right, and we want to alleviate some of this joint reaction force pain. Because if I do have an angle of inclination of the femoral neck that is coxa valga and too much vertical pull of the gluteus medius and deterioration of the top surface of my femoral head, that could cause pain. And if I'm obese, when I walk, that could be painful. So how do I use a cane to solve those issues? Well, let's say, for instance, I have, the force of body weight, all right? And if I have 100 newtons coming down on this particular fulcrum, this point right here, and 100 newtons coming down in this direction, all right, this is 100 plus 100. That means that this point right here has to push upwards with 200 newtons. There's 100 newtons coming down and 100 newtons coming down. Therefore, the sawhorse or the seesaw or the fulcrum must push up with 200 newtons. Well, let's think about this here being the acetabulum. And this is the force of body weight coming down along with this. Well, what I would want to do is imagine if I could get something aside from my femoral head here to push upwards. So let's say I took a cane, and as I push down on the cane pushes back up on me. So let's say I push down on the cane and the cane pushes up here with 50 newtons. Well, now I have 100 plus 100 going down, which is 200 going down, 200 newtons going downwards towards the ground. That equals 200. But then I can reduce the overall force at the acetabulum because the cane, as I push down on the cane is pushing up with 50 newtons. So 200 minus the 50 newtons from the cane means now the acetabulum, the joint reaction force at the acetabulum only has to be 150 newtons. So if I am obese and I do have deterioration of the superior border of my acetabulum, or if I have a coxa valga angle of inclination and there's too much force on the superior border of my acetabulum, I could use a cane on either side to contribute to the upward force that would balance out the force of body weight. So if your problem is this superior deterioration pain because of the force of body weight or the angle of inclination associated with the coxa valga angle at your femoral neck, using a seesaw on either side, using a cane on either side of the body would help at least to alleviate the force of body weight or alleviate some of the vertical pull of the gluteus medius and make it so that the joint itself, the joint reaction force, can drop. And if the joint reaction force is less, where in the beginning the joint reaction force had to be 200 newtons, now it's only 150 newtons, there's going to be less pain on that system. So in the case if you are obese and you're trying to reduce joint reaction force, in that case, use a cane on either side of the body. That will help push up and balance out or cancel out the force of body weight and reduce the pressure at any part of the superior portion of the femoral head. But you could use a cane for all sorts of different reasons. Let's say, for instance, I broke my foot. All right, and because I have a broken foot, I don't want to put any weight on my foot. So let's say I have my foot here. Oh boy. And I don't want to put any weight on the foot. So let me do a better drawing. And let me maybe go like this. Escape. I have a feeling I'm going to go overtime today. Let's say I have a foot here. All right, here's a leg. Let's try to draw. I have my leg here. This is just my foot here. Sorry about the drawing. And I have another foot here. And this foot is broken. Well, now I don't want to put any weight on this foot at all. I don't want to put any weight. So if I use a cane on this side, that's the force of pushing down on the cane. The cane is going to push back up and it's going to alleviate the force on this foot. So if I have a broken foot on this side, I don't want to use a cane on the other side because the cane in that case is going to cancel out the force of body weight on this side of my body. So if I have a broken foot, I want to use a cane on the same side as the broken foot. And then as I push down on the cane is going to push back up on me. And that's going to mean that I don't even have to put this foot down. The force of body weight is going to push down in this direction. The cane is going to push up in this direction. And they should be able to cancel each other out. And if they cancel each other out, then this foot over here can take a step on the ground. But instead of putting this foot on the ground, I would use the cane instead, and you can almost just lift this foot entirely off the ground. So if the problem is obesity or this increased pain at the femoral head, I would use the cane on either side. If the injury is a sprained ankle or a sprained foot, I would use a cane on the same side. But if I had a problem associated with a weakened gluteus medius, and I'll show you here, let's just try, here's, let's go, how am I going to draw this? Let's go like this. It's my femur, my femoral head here. Let's draw it on the same thing on the other side. Let's see if I can do that. And I have my hip here. And my ilium. And then you have your vertebrae like this. Now, if I have a weakened gluteus medius on this side, if the gluteus medius is weak on this side, it's going to mean that when I lift this leg off the ground, when this leg is up and it's not on the ground, it's bent, here's my kneecap, and this foot is off the ground, and this foot is on the ground, let's go like that, it's on the ground, then there's nothing supporting this side. It's going to make my pelvis want to rotate in this direction here. Okay, here's the axis of rotation of the system here. The force of body weight is coming down in this direction. This force here, okay, is acting at a distance away from this axis of rotation, which means there's a torque associated with the force of body weight. And that torque is going to make the hip want to rotate in this direction. Wouldn't it be nice if because this leg is not on the ground, wouldn't it be nice if I could prop up the hip with something pushing in that direction? That would create a torque in this direction that would counter the torque associated with the force of body weight. How do I do that? Well, again, if I push down on a cane, if I push down on the cane with my hand, the cane is going to push back up on my body, or push back up as an equal and opposite force because of Newton's laws. So although the hip wants to rotate in this direction, the force of the cane pushing in this direction is going to force, and I'm going to erase that, and I'm going to erase that. The cane is going to force my hip to rotate in that direction. The force of body weight is causing the pelvis to rotate in this direction. If I don't have the cane at all, there's going to be that pelvic drop and potential for my Trendelenburg gait to emerge. But if I use a cane, I would use a cane on the opposite side of the weakened gluteus medius, because as I push down on the cane is going to push back up and create a torque associated with the cane that is going to counteract the torque associated with the force of body weight. And because of that, I might not need to have such an emergence of that Trendelenburg gait, because there's going to be less pelvic rotation. So if I have the force of body weight is the problem, okay, and I don't have a weakened gluteus medius, then I would use a cane on either side. And what I'm trying to do there is reduce the joint reaction force associated with the force of body weight. And for that situation, a cane on either side would be fine. That's assuming that I do not have a weakened gluteus medius. If I have a broken foot, I would want to use the cane on the same side. That should be a BRO. Oh boy. That should be a broke. If I have a broken foot, I would want to use the cane on the same side of the broken foot to alleviate all of the force on that broken foot and make it so that the cane is counteracting the force of the body weight as opposed to the limb. But if I had a weakened gluteus medius, which is causing too much pelvic tilt and a pelvic lurch in the direction opposite of that weakened gluteus medius, I would use a cane on the opposite side. Now, if I, for instance, use a cane on the same side in this situation here, and the cane is pushing down, I'm pushing down on the cane and the cane is pushing up on me, then the cane actually in this situation is going to push up here if I'm using it on the same side as the weakened gluteus medius. That's going to force a torque in this direction, which is the same direction as the torque associated with the force of body weight. And it's going to make this pelvis rotate downwards even more. So if I have a weakened gluteus medius that's causing pelvic rotation, and I use a cane on the wrong side, I use a cane on the same side as the gluteus medius weakness, you're going to make the problem even worse. So if you're a physical therapist and you're suggesting that somebody use a cane, you have to understand why they need to use a cane and how Newton's laws factor into the forces and pressures put on the cane so you can make an appropriate suggestion. Otherwise, what you think is going to be helping them could make the problem worse. Okay, Zach, are we clear with that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not just a cane. It's not just use a cane. It's understand what the problem is. What is the kinesiology behind the suggestion? Where are the torques? Where are the forces? Where are the axes of rotation? Where is the forces that you're trying to counteract? And if you don't have an understanding of these things, then what you think is going to be an approach that's going to help the problem could indeed make the problem worse. All right, so let's clear these drawings. Let's close this out for 1 second. Got that all on recording, so we'll be able to use that later. And let me go, I'm pretty sure I'm recording it. So let me go back to here, the lecture, and just go through the rest of the lecture so that we can see. So if I have a joint reaction force that's pretty high, 600 newtons, okay, and I multiply that by 12, let's see, am I doing this? Is this necessary? So let's just use that. Let's say I have a weakened force of the gluteus medius. And remember, the length of the arrow, when you're talking about vectors, implies the strength of that particular force. So a very small arrow here, but the force of body weight is pretty great. That means because the force of body weight is stronger than the force of the gluteus medius, this hip wants to rotate in this direction due to this torque. But if I can use a cane on the same side, now that cane is always going to be even more lateral than the force of body weight. So the distance here associated with the cane is greater than the distance associated with the force of body weight. And because of that, let's say the force of body weight is 100 units. The force of the cane never has to be the same as the force of body weight, because the cane is also using this extra distance here to create torque. I always have to push down on the cane with less force than the force of body weight, because the cane is creating a greater torque because it's further away from the axis of rotation than the force of body weight is. And either way, the upwards force of the cane is going to counteract the force of body weight, and therefore the force of the gluteus medius doesn't really have to do anything. It's the cane that's taking over for the force of the gluteus medius. All right? If you put a cane on the wrong side, though, the force of the gluteus medius is pulling down, but it's not strong enough to overcome the force of body weight. The force of body weight is trying to get this system to spin in this direction here. All right? And the force of the cane is trying to get the system to rotate in this direction here. This here is a clockwise rotation, as is this a clockwise rotation. So now the cane on the same side as the force of the gluteus medius is going to increase pelvic rotation and make it so that the force of gluteus medius has to work even harder, but it won't. So what's going to happen is even more of a pelvic drop, which is going to lead to the emergence of even more of a Trendelenburg gait. All right. The last thing I would say is you could also lift a suitcase or do something else aside from the cane. So if I have the force of gluteus medius is not very strong, the force of body weight is forcing the pelvis to rotate in this direction. Well, what I could do is I could lift a heavy suitcase. If I lift a heavy suitcase in this direction, on this side, as I pull up on the suitcase, because I pull up when I hold the handle, the suitcase is pulling down. So if I used a suitcase on this side, the suitcase would provide a torque in this direction. The force of body weight would provide a torque in that direction, and it would make the pelvic rotation worse. But if I use the suitcase on the same side as the force of the gluteus medius, I pull up on the handle, but the force of the suitcase pulls down. Now the force of the suitcase is pulling in this direction, whereas the force of body weight is pulling in this direction. And now the suitcase will counteract the force of the body weight. So again, the force of the gluteus medius can be pretty low in order to balance that particular system out. So we can use the terms torque and force and rotation, and we can use those to understand mechanisms of injury to the hip, but we can also use the same concepts to talk about how we would fix those things using canes, using a backpack on one side versus the other. So I think that these terms, these kinesiology terms, kinematics and kinetics, torque, force, levers, Newton's laws, all of these things not only can give us a little bit of an explanation into the actual cause of the overuse injuries, but they can also give us a hypothesis as to the solution to deal with these particular injuries. So I think that overuse is more of a descriptive term, but using imbalance in force, torque, Coxa-Valga angle of inclination, obesity, force of body weight, those are all more explanations of where these imbalances in kinesiology could come from, leading to problems. And you can also use the same terms to postulate solutions to the problems. So I think that these are pretty powerful concepts. And we haven't really talked about anything more than torque, force of body weight, and Newton's first three laws, and maybe a little bit of vector addition. But I don't think any of those concepts are too difficult to contemplate. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share. Does anybody have any questions about what we went over?
No.
Okay. I really, truly appreciate your attentiveness and the respect that you give to me in terms of being on these calls, and you know, your hard work in your own educational endeavors. So I couldn't be more thankful to you guys. If you have any questions about your exams, please feel free to reach out to me. We have our next exam review on Monday of this coming week. Our next exam is online starting Wednesday. Don't forget all the homeworks, and don't forget, Jose, Tampa Bay all day. All right,
Thank
guys.
you, Professor.
We'll see.
All right, buddy. You guys take care.
All right.